They say that old age is when time starts to pass more quickly. Nonsense. Time stretches out like rubber, especially at 4 in the morning, when joint pain keeps you awake and the shadows of rare cars crawl across the ceiling. At 78, I've seen a lot, but loneliness is my most faithful companion. My house on Maple Street is my last stronghold. It's a one-story house with cracked paint and a creaky porch. The neighbors have long since changed. Instead of old acquaintances, there are now young families who look at me as if I were a museum exhibit. I used to teach physics in high school, explaining the laws of thermodynamics to teenagers. Now I myself have turned into entropy, steadily striving for the greatest disorder. Every morning begins the same way. At 5:30, I take my first dose of medication. Then I make coffee the old-fashioned way, in a Turkish coffee pot. Sarah, my daughter, gave me a coffee machine last Christmas, but I haven't even unpacked it. It sits in the garage among other useless gifts. Who needs these gadgets when your fingers can barely bend? The TV is my main companion. News, old movies, sometimes documentaries about World War II. Helen, my wife, died 11 years ago. Cancer. She burned out quickly like a match. We lived together for 43 years, and when she left, I never learned how to fill the silence. On Wednesday, the phone rang. I have an old landline phone with a rotary dial. My daughter turned it off. These cell phones with their endless flickering screens annoy me. Dad, it's Sarah. How are you? Her voice always sounds like she's talking to a 5-year-old, condescending. Alive as you can see. Well, you can't see me, but I'm here. Mark and I are thinking of stopping by today. Why? I knew the answer, but I wanted her to say it out loud. Just to visit. To talk about the nursing home? You can save your gas pause. I could hear her breathing. She must have rolled her eyes. She's been doing that since childhood. Dad, it's not a nursing home. It's a residence for seniors with independent living. You'll have your own apartment, but at the same time, there will be supervisors and a schedule, like in prison. No, thank you. You're unbearable. We'll be there at 2. She hung up without waiting for an answer. Typical Sarah. She always knows what's best for everyone. I looked at my watch. 11:20. That meant I had 2.5 hours to prepare for the invasion. I didn't bother cleaning up. Let them see how I live. 3 days' worth of dishes had piled up in the kitchen, and the newspapers in the living room were arranged according to my system, which no one but me understood. Chaos, but my chaos. At exactly 2 o'clock, their SUV pulled up. Sarah was a carbon copy of her mother in her youth, only with a harder look. Her hair was pulled back into a neat bun, and her face wore a mask of concern. Mark walked behind her, carrying some bags. My son-in-law was invisible. We've known each other for 20 years, but all I know about him is that he works for an insurance company and loves golf. Hello, Dad. Sarah hugged me without taking off her coat. You've lost weight, and you're still as observant as ever. Come in since you're here. Mark nodded to me and carried the bags to the kitchen. A minute later, his muffled voice came from there. Wow. We brought food, Sarah said, taking off her gloves. Lasagna, your favorite. Since when is lasagna my favorite? Since Mom used to make it every Sunday. Helen made it because you like lasagna. I prefer steak. Sarah sighed and walked into the living room. She looked around the room and grimaced. It smells musty in here. When was the last time you opened the windows? When I needed to. Mark returned from the kitchen holding a cracked cup. I made coffee, Harold. But your dishes. What's wrong with them? They're dirty, Sarah said bluntly. Dad, how can you live like this? You were always so neat. That was a different person. I took the cup from Mark. Thanks for the coffee. We sat down in the living room. I sat in my worn armchair. They sat on the sofa opposite, like in an interrogation. How's your blood pressure? Sarah asked. Like an astronaut's. Dad, seriously. 160/90, if you're so interested. Dr. Fisher says that's almost normal for my age. Sarah exchanged glances with Mark. Here we go. We found a great place, she began. Sunny Gardens. It's a 20-minute drive from here near the park. They have one apartment available on the first floor overlooking the garden. I'm not going anywhere. But why? Sarah leaned forward. They have 24-hour medical care, 3 meals a day, cultural activities. You could make friends your own age. I don't need friends my own age. All they talk about is illnesses and friends who have died. What do you talk about with your current friends? Sarah asked. Nothing. I don't have any. Mark cleared his throat. Harold, I understand your reluctance to change your surroundings. But think about the practical side. This house requires constant maintenance. The roof leaks, the porch steps are rotten. What if you fall? Who will help you? I won't fall. You've fallen before, Sarah reminded him. Last year, when you were changing a light bulb. It's a good thing Jason stopped by to check on you. Jason is my grandson, Sarah's son. He's the only member of the family with whom I have a more or less normal relationship. He's a smart guy who works with computers. I enjoy talking to him, even though I don't understand half of what he's talking about. I fell once, I grumbled. It happens to everyone. Dad, Sarah sighed, we're worried about you. I can't come every day to check if everything is okay. I have a job, my own house. I'm not asking you to check. Live your life. But you're part of that life? Sarah raised her voice. Why are you so stubborn? Mom would want you to be safe. Don't you dare speak for Helen, I said, slamming my cup down on the table so hard that coffee spilled out. She would never have sent me to a nursing home. It's not a nursing home, Sarah jumped up. God, it's impossible to talk to you. You turn everything into a scandal. Mark put his hand on her shoulder. Sarah, let's not. No, Mark, she shook off his hand. I'm tired of this. Dad, do you know what you're doing? You're punishing us for Mom's death, as if it were our fault. The words hit me like a slap in the face. I looked at my daughter and didn't recognize her. When did she become so harsh? I'm not punishing anyone, I said quietly. I just want to live in my own home, where Helen and I raised you, where everything has a story. Stories won't keep you warm in winter when the heating breaks down, Sarah said, crossing her arms over her chest. And they won't call an ambulance when you have a seizure. If I'm going to die, I'd rather do it here than among strangers in a government facility. Mark stood up. Maybe we should discuss this later. When everyone has calmed down. There's nothing to discuss, I snapped. My answer is no. Sarah shook her head. You know, Dad, sometimes I think you enjoy playing the role of the unhappy old man. You like making us feel guilty. And you like thinking you know what's best for me, I retorted. But you don't. You never have. Fine. Sarah headed for the door. Stay here. Freeze, starve, fall down. But don't call me later asking for help. Sarah? Mark tried to stop her, but she was already putting on her coat. No, Mark. I can't do this anymore. Let him do what he wants. She left, slamming the door behind her. Mark stood in the hallway, shifting awkwardly from foot to foot. Forgive her, Harold. She's just nervous. Go after her, Mark. She doesn't like to wait. He nodded but didn't move. You know, Jason asked about you. He said he wanted to come by on the weekend to set up your new TV. I didn't ask for a new TV. It's a gift from him. He's just as worried about you as Sarah is. He just shows it differently. I didn't answer. Mark sighed and left. Through the window, I could see Sarah sitting in the car, talking furiously, probably about me. Mark got behind the wheel and they drove away, leaving behind silence and the smell of lasagna from the kitchen. I returned to my chair and stared at the photo of Helen on the mantelpiece for a long time. She was smiling in a way only she knew how, as if she knew something that no one else knew. You see, dear, I said to the photo, your daughter wants to put me in a nursing home. What would you say? Helen was silent, but I knew the answer. She always said, Harold, you're as stubborn as a mule. But that's why I love you. I wonder if anyone else still loves me for that. I doubt it. For Sarah, my stubbornness is just an annoying obstacle to her plans. For Mark, I'm a burden he has to put up with for his wife's sake. Saturday began as usual, with my knees creaking and me looking for my glasses, which I'm always losing. This time I found them in the bathroom, next to my toothbrush. Old age is when your belongings start to take on a life of their own, moving around the house as they please. After breakfast, oatmeal and toast, the same thing for 10 years now. I was going to spend the day as usual. Newspaper, TV, maybe a walk to the corner if the weather permitted, but a phone call changed my plans. Grandpa? It's Jason. My grandson's voice always made me smile. He was the only person in the family who didn't see me as a burden or a problem to be solved. Jason, to what do I owe this honor? Remember I promised to stop by with the new TV? I'm free now, so I can swing by in about 2 hours if you're not busy. At my age, even going to the bathroom is considered the event of the day. So no, I'm not busy. Jason laughed. I like that he understood my sarcasm and didn't take offense. Great. I'll be there in about an hour. And I'll bring the Wi-Fi router. As agreed, a Wi-Fi router. I repeated, mispronouncing the words. Sounds like something out of science fiction. Grandpa, you're a physicist. You should be interested, a retired physicist. Now I'm only interested in whether I'll live to see the evening news. You will, Jason said confidently. You'll outlive us all. See you later. After our conversation, I felt a surge of energy. I even tidied up a little. I didn't want my grandson to see the complete mess. I wasn't shy about it in front of Sarah, but Jason, he was different. He never judged my lifestyle. Right on time, the doorbell rang. Jason was standing on the porch loaded down with boxes. Tall, thin, with tousled dark hair, he reminded me of myself when I was young. Only his glasses were fashionable, with thin frames, while mine at his age were massive, like Buddy Holly's. Hi, Grandpa, he squeezed past me into the house. I brought everything you need for your technological breakthrough. Just don't blow up my house with your inventions, I grumbled, but without real annoyance. Jason unloaded the boxes in the living room and looked around. It's cleaner here than last time. Don't start, I warned. Your mother already did her inspection this week. How did it go? As usual. She wants to put me in a nursing home. Jason sighed. It's not a nursing home, Grandpa. It's, I know. Independent living facility for seniors. I'm not so senile that I don't understand euphemisms. She's just worried, Jason began unpacking the boxes. Mom is so controlling. I wonder who she takes after, I smiled, remembering what Helen was like. Jason pulled out a flat black TV as thin as a magazine. Look how beautiful it is. 50 inches, smart features, internet, streaming services, everything your heart desires. My old TV was fine. That dinosaur? Grandpa, it weighed a ton and showed everything in green. It gave the news a special charm. Jason laughed and continued unpacking. I watched his confident movements. It's strange how a grandson, with whom I have no blood connection, he is Mark's son from his first marriage, whom Sarah adopted, turned out to be the closest person in the family. How's work? I asked just to keep the conversation going. Busy, Jason said as he connected some wires to the TV. I moved to the cybersecurity department 3 months ago. We track potential threats, hacker attacks, data leaks. You know, like digital detectives, sounds important? I was genuinely impressed. And dangerous? Jason smiled. Not quite James Bond style, if that's what you're thinking. Most of the time I stare at a screen and analyze data, but sometimes it gets exciting. Last week we detected an attempt to hack into a major bank's database. We prevented millions from being stolen. My grandson is a hero, I said ironically, but I was actually proud of him. More like a nerd with access to good tool, he said, pulling out a small black box with antennas. This is your new router. It will create a Wi-Fi network in the house, and you'll be able to connect your TV and phone to the internet. If you finally decide to use a smartphone, I won't. And any other devices, he finished, ignoring my comment. Let's find a good place for it. We decided to put the router on the bookshelf. Jason explained that for the best signal, it needed to be placed higher up and without any obstacles around it. I pretended to be interested, even though I didn't understand half of the terms. We need to come up with a name for the network and a password, Jason said as he plugged the device into the outlet. Why do we need a name for the network? To distinguish yours from your neighbors. Let's go with something simple. GeroldNet? Sounds like the name of a pharmacy chain. I grimaced. How about physics rules? Physics rules? Jason raised an eyebrow. Seriously, Grandpa? I taught physics for 40 years. I have a right to be proud. Okay, physics rules it is, he typed the name into his phone. Now for the password. Something you'll remember easily, but not too obvious. I thought for a moment. Helen, 1945. Helen's date of birth. Jason nodded without commenting on my choice. He understood that Helen still held an important place in my life. While he was setting up the TV, I went to the kitchen to make tea. From the window, I noticed movement in the house across the street. No one had lived there for a long time. The last tenants had moved out over a year ago. The house stood abandoned, with boarded-up windows on the first floor. "Jason," I called, "do you know if anyone has moved into the Robinson house?" He came to the window. "I haven't heard anything." "Why?" "I think someone's there." I saw movement on the second floor. We looked at the house across the street together. Sure enough, a shadow flashed in one of the windows. "Maybe new tenants," Jason shrugged. "Or workers." The house has been in need of repair for a long time. It's strange that I haven't seen any trucks with furniture or building materials. "You don't spend all day looking out the window, Grandpa." I didn't mention that this was exactly what I did most of the time. I watched the street like a retired spy. We returned to the living room, where Jason continued to set up the equipment. I watched his manipulations like an anthropologist observing the rituals of an unknown tribe. "There," he finally said, turning on the TV. A bright menu with colorful icons appeared on the screen. "Now you have access to Netflix, Hulu, YouTube, and dozens of other services. I set everything up on my account, so you don't have to pay." "Are there any regular channels?" I asked. "Of course." Jason pressed a few buttons on the remote, and a news program appeared. "See? Everything is the same as before, only the picture is better." I must admit, the image quality was impressive. I could almost count the wrinkles on the news anchor's face. "Impressive," I admitted. "But how do I switch between all this digital stuff?" For the next hour, Jason patiently explained how to use the remote, how to search for movies and shows, and how to return to the main menu. I pretended to remember everything, but we both knew I would forget half of it by evening. "Maybe I should write down the instructions," he suggested. "No need." "I'll manage," I said stubbornly. "I'm not a complete idiot after all." "No one thinks that, Grandpa. It's just that new technology can be complicated. Technology was simpler in my day. One lever turned it on, the other turned it off." "Did dinosaurs run around the streets in your day?" Jason teased me. "No, we rode them to school." We both laughed. I could joke with Jason. He didn't take my sarcasm as a sign of senility, unlike his mother. After setting up the equipment, we settled down on the sofa with tea. Jason told me more about his work, and to my surprise, I listened with interest. "Most people don't realize how vulnerable they are online," he said. "Every time you connect to the internet, you leave digital traces. Hackers can use these traces to access your data, bank accounts, and personal information." "That sounds scary," I remarked. "Maybe I'd better stay in the pre-digital era?" "No, there's no need to be afraid of technology. You just have to be careful. Don't open suspicious emails, use complex passwords, and don't enter personal data on unverified websites." "I'll remember that if I ever decide to go online," Jason smiled. "You'd be surprised how many interesting things there are, Grandpa. You can watch old movies, listen to music from your youth, read books that aren't in the library." Maybe, I didn't want to admit it, but the idea sounded tempting. "But I'm fine as I am." Suddenly, my gaze was drawn back to the movement in the house across the street. This time, I clearly saw a man looking out the window. He was tall, with dark hair, wearing a black t-shirt. "Look," I said to Jason, "there's definitely someone there." Jason looked in the direction I was pointing. "Yeah, looks like new neighbors. Maybe we should go over and say hello?" "I don't want to intrude," I said, turning away from the window. "If they want to get to know us, they'll come over themselves." "Still living like a hermit?" Jason shook his head. "Grandpa, socializing is good at any age. I get enough social interaction from the mailman and the cashier at the store. And from you when you come by," Jason sighed. "I wish I could come by more often. It's just that work takes up all my time." "Don't make excuses. I understand you have your own life." "You're part of my life too," Jason said seriously, "and I worry about you." "Not like Mom. I'm not trying to control you, but it's important to me to know that you're okay." I felt a lump in my throat. Helen always said I had a hard time expressing my emotions, and she was right. But Jason seemed to understand me without words. "I'm fine," I finally said. "Really?" "I'm doing okay." "I know," he smiled. "You're a tough nut to crack." We talked about various little things. Jason told me about his girlfriend Emily, whom he had been dating for 2 years. I asked when the wedding was, and he joked that he had to pay off his student loans first. A typical pragmatist, just like me. When he was about to leave, it was already getting dark. I walked him to the door. Use the TV, he said. There's a channel with science documentaries that I think you'll like. I'll check it out, I promised. Thanks for stopping by. You're welcome, Grandpa, he said and gave me a hug, which was rare. I'll call you in a week to see how you're getting on with the technology. When his car drove away, I went back to the living room and sat down in front of the new TV. I picked up the remote control, so light and with so many buttons. I tried to remember what Jason had explained. I pressed a few buttons at random, and the screen came to life, displaying a menu of movies. The wonders of technology. In my youth, we couldn't even imagine such things. I've lived long enough to see how a black and white box with an antenna has turned into a flat screen connected to a whole world of information. My gaze fell back on the house across the street. The windows were dimly lit, but there were no silhouettes to be seen. Whoever the new neighbors were, they were clearly in no hurry to get acquainted. Well, that suited me fine. At my age, new acquaintances are an unnecessary headache. I turned my attention to the TV. Maybe this digital age wasn't so bad if it helped me stay in touch with my grandson. Jason was my bridge to the modern world, and I was grateful to him for that, even if I never told him so directly. After Jason's visit, I spent a few days learning how to use the new TV. To my surprise, I even began to enjoy it. Jason wasn't lying. The science documentary channel was really interesting. I spent 2 evenings watching a program about black holes. It was nice to learn that some of the theories I had taught back in the 80s had been confirmed, while others had been disproved. Science hadn't stood still, even if I had fallen behind. On Wednesday evening, I went to bed as usual, around 10 o'clock. Old habits die hard. A glass of water on the nightstand, pills for tomorrow, glasses next to the book I had been reading for the second week. The biography of Richard Feynman, one of my scientific heroes. Sleep did not come immediately. I listened to the sounds of the house, the creaking of the floorboards, the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the old wall clock in the living room. Every house has its own voice, and mine is no exception. Over the years, I had learned all its intonations and could distinguish between the usual nighttime creaking and the kind that heralded problems with the plumbing or electrical system. The house across the street was now showing signs of life too. A couple of times I had noticed lights in the second-floor windows, but I had never seen the residents themselves. None of them had come out to introduce themselves to their neighbors, which was strange for our neighborhood, where newcomers usually went around to the nearest houses with homemade baked goods or a bottle of wine. But that didn't particularly bother me. Fewer social obligations. I was already starting to doze off when the phone rang. Sharp and insistent, it jolted me out of my impending sleep. I looked at the clock. It was 2:13 a.m. My heart skipped a beat. Calls at this hour rarely bring good news. I fumbled for my glasses and groaned as I got out of bed. The thought flashed through my mind. Sarah? Has something happened to her or Mark? Shuffling in my slippers, I hurried to the phone in the hallway. Hello? My voice sounded hoarse from sleep. Grandpa! It was Jason, and his tone made me wake up instantly. He was almost shouting, Grandpa, get out! Get out! Jason? What? Get out of the house now! There was a panic in his voice that I had never heard before. What's wrong? I felt my heart pounding in my chest. Are you okay? No time to explain, he said quickly, almost gasping for breath. Please just get out of the house, right now. Get as far away as you can. Jason, you're scaring me. I tried to sound calm, even though I was growing increasingly anxious. Tell me what's going on. There was a moment of silence on the line. Then Jason spoke more quietly, but with the same tension. Please trust me. I can't explain everything right now. Just get out of the house. Something in his voice made me believe that the situation was really serious. Jason was never one to panic or joke around. If he said to leave, then there must be good reason for it. Okay, I said, surprised at my own calmness. I'm leaving. Where should I go? Just get away from the house. To the neighbors across the street, anywhere. Just hurry. I'll call you back when I'm out, I said, and hung up. I froze in the hallway for a second. My brain frantically searched for possible reasons for such an urgent evacuation. Fire? Gas leak? Some kind of threat? I listened, but the house was quiet as usual. Nothing was burning. There was no smell of gas. But Jason, there was real panic in his voice. I decided not to waste time getting dressed. I was wearing an old flannel robe and slippers, not the best outfit for a nighttime adventure. but elegance was not a priority right now. I quickly went to the bedroom and grabbed my cell phone, which I usually ignored but kept charged at Sarah's insistence. My wallet was on the dresser. I took it too, although I had no idea why I might need it in the middle of the night. My gaze fell on a photo of Helen in a silver frame on the bedside table. She was smiling, captured in a moment of happiness during our trip to Yellowstone, 2 years before her diagnosis. I took the photo too. If something happened to the house, I didn't want to lose it. Thoughts raced through my head. Maybe I should take something else. Documents? Medication? But Jason's insistence prevailed. If he said to act quickly, then every second counted. I walked out into the hallway, stuffing my phone and wallet into my robe pockets as I went, clutching the photo to my chest. I paused for a second at the front door. Should I lock it? I decided not to and just stepped out onto the porch. The night air was cool but not cold. A typical August night. The street lay silent, lit only by a few streetlights. Not a soul in sight, only a couple of houses with their windows lit. Night owls like me now. I stood on the porch not knowing where to go. Jason said to stay away from the house, but how far? And in which direction? I decided to cross the street. From there I would be able to see what was happening to my house, if anything really did happen. As soon as I stepped down the stairs, I noticed movement in the house opposite. A shadow flashed in the second-floor window. Strange. Why are they awake at this hour? I remembered my concern about the new neighbors. Who are they? Why are they so secretive? But now is not the time to think about neighbors. I fumbled for my cell phone in my pocket and dialed Jason's number. He answered after the first ring. Grandpa, are you outside? Yes, I'm outside. Now can you tell me what's going on? Are you away from the house? He ignored my question. I'm crossing the street. Jason, explain. Okay, he seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. Keep walking. Get as far away as you can. I can't explain everything right now, but I swear I have serious reasons to be concerned. Are you in trouble? I asked directly, stopping in the middle of the street. Pause. Not exactly, but the situation is complicated. Please just stay away from home. I'll explain everything when I can. Jason, I'm not moving until you tell me something. I stood stubbornly in the middle of the road, clutching Helen's photo. Another pause, then Jason spoke more quietly, as if afraid of being overheard. I can't talk on the phone. It's too risky. But have you noticed anything strange in the last few days? Any unusual people near the house? Maybe strange noises? I thought about it. The new neighbors were unusual, of course. No one had seen them. They hadn't introduced themselves. But that was hardly what Jason was asking about. Nothing special except for the new tenants across the street, I replied. They keep to themselves. Across the street? Something changed in Jason's voice. In the Robinsons' house? Yes, there. I told you when you came over. Damn, he exhaled. Grandpa, listen to me carefully. Go to your neighbors on the left, to Frank. Ring the doorbell, say you need help. Stay there. Frank is asleep at this hour, I objected. I can't wake a man in the middle of the night without an explanation. Tell him you're not feeling well. Whatever. Just don't stay out on the street and don't go back home. Promise me, Jason. Promise me. Okay, I promise, I sighed. But you owe me a full explanation, young man. You'll get an explanation. Jason's voice softened a little. Thank you for trusting me. Go to Frank right now. He hung up. I stood in the middle of the street, in my bathrobe and slippers, clutching a photo of my wife, feeling like a complete idiot. What was I doing? Running out of my own house in the middle of the night at the insistence of my grandson, who refused to explain why. I turned and looked at my house. It looked normal. Dark windows, a familiar silhouette against the night sky. No signs of danger. Maybe Jason was wrong, or was he the victim of some kind of prank? But no, his fear was real. I had never heard such panic in his voice. Something serious had prompted him to call me in the middle of the night and demand immediate evacuation. I looked at the house across the street again. Now it was dark, no signs of life. A strange coincidence. Jason became particularly alarmed when I mentioned the new neighbors. What did he know about them? Pondering this, I headed for the house of Frank Collins, my neighbor on the left. Frank, a retiree slightly younger than me, had been living alone since his wife's death 3 years ago. We weren't close friends, but we maintained a neighborly relationship, sometimes exchanging newspapers, discussing the weather and local news. As I approached his house, I noticed a light in one of the windows. It seemed that Frank was also awake. This eased my conscience a little. At least I wouldn't be waking someone up. I rang the doorbell, feeling increasingly ridiculous. What would I say? Sorry, Frank, my grandson forced me to leave home in the middle of the night without explanation. A minute later, the door opened. Frank was standing there in his pajamas and glasses, a book in his hand. Harold? He looked surprised but not annoyed. What's going on? I decided to be honest. Frank, sorry for barging in. My grandson called me a few minutes ago and told me to leave the house immediately. He didn't explain why, but he sounded very alarmed. He asked me to stay with the neighbors. Frank stepped back without hesitation, letting me in. Come in, of course, maybe a gas leak or something like that. I don't know, I crossed the threshold, grateful for the lack of unnecessary questions. Everything looked normal at home, but Jason isn't the type to panic for no reason. Jason is your grandson who works with computers? Frank led me into the living room. You mentioned him. Yes, he's with some computer security company. I sat down in the chair he offered, still clutching Helen's photo to my chest. Frank noticed the frame in my hands but tactfully didn't comment. Instead, he asked, tea? Coffee? Or something stronger, given the circumstances? Tea, if that's okay. I nodded gratefully, and sorry for barging in. Don't worry about it, Frank waved me off. I wasn't sleeping anyway. I was rereading Agatha Christie. At our age, sleep is a luxury, not a necessity. He went into the kitchen and I looked around. Frank's house was similar to mine. The same layout, typical of our neighborhood, built in the 60s. But unlike my home, everything here was neat and modern. It seemed that Frank had adapted to old age better than I had. I could see my house through the living room window. It was still dark and quiet. No signs of danger. I began to doubt my decision to listen to Jason. Maybe I should have demanded an explanation. Frank returned with 2 cups of tea. So, he said, sitting down opposite me, your grandson just told you to leave without explanation? That's right, I said, taking a sip of tea. He said he couldn't talk on the phone, that it was too risky. He sounded like someone was after him. That's strange, Frank frowned. Maybe he's having problems at work. You said he does something related to security? Cybersecurity, I corrected him. He tracks hackers, protects company data, something like that. We both fell silent, thinking about the situation. The silence was broken only by the quiet sound of the TV from the next room. Frank, like many older people, often left it on for background noise. Did he ask about anything specific? Frank inquired. He asked if I had noticed anything unusual around the house. When I mentioned the new neighbors across the street, he became even more concerned. What new neighbors? Frank looked puzzled. At the Robinsons' house? Yes, there. Haven't you seen them? They moved in a few days ago. I haven't seen anyone, Frank shook his head, and I haven't heard of any new tenants. The house is still for sale. As far as I know, that got me thinking. If the house is officially vacant, who is living there? Squatters? Or something more sinister? I saw lights in the windows, I insisted, and people. They're definitely there. I believe you, Frank nodded. It's just strange that no one in the neighborhood knows about the new neighbors. Usually news like that spreads quickly. We fell silent again. I looked at my house through the window, trying to figure out what could have scared Jason so much. Was it related to the mysterious residents across the street? And if so, how? My thoughts were interrupted by the ringing of my cell phone. I struggled to find it in my robe pocket. Jason? Grandpa, are you at the neighbors? He still sounded tense but not as panicked. Yes, I'm at Frank's. Now, can you explain what's going on? You'll understand soon, he replied evasively. Just stay there. And stay away from the windows. The windows? Why? Just do as I say. Please, I exchanged glances with Frank, who was listening to the conversation with interest. Okay, I agreed, but you owe me an explanation. And you'll get one. Very soon. Bye, Grandpa. He hung up. I put the phone down on the table and recounted the conversation to Frank. Stay away from windows? He frowned. That sounds serious. Yes, and that doesn't reassure me, I admitted. What the hell is going on? Frank stood up and moved away from the window, gesturing for me to do the same. Better to listen to your grandson. Let's move to the dining room. There are no windows there. I reluctantly followed him, still looking at my house. What could be so dangerous there? A fire? An explosion? A robbery? In Frank's dining room, we sat down at the dining table. I felt ridiculous in my bathrobe and with a photograph in my hands, but Frank tactfully did not comment on my appearance. Maybe we should call the police, he suggested. And what would I tell them? My grandson forced me to leave my house without explanation? They'd think I was a senile old man. Maybe, Frank agreed, but it's better to be safe than sorry when it comes to safety. I thought about it. Jason hadn't mentioned the police. If the problem was that serious, wouldn't he have advised calling them? Let's wait a while, I decided. Jason said everything would be cleared up soon. Frank nodded and offered me more tea. I agreed and he went back to the kitchen. Left alone, I looked at Helen's photo. What would she say about this situation? She would probably laugh at us. Two old people hiding from an unknown danger in the middle of the night. But she also always told me to trust my intuition. And now my intuition was telling me that Jason wouldn't panic like this without a serious reason. Frank returned with tea and cookies. We sat in silence, listening to the sounds from the street. But apart from the occasional passing car, nothing disturbed the night's tranquility. You know, Frank said after a long silence, I never understood why you refused to move into a nursing home. Sarah said she offered you a good place. I sighed. Not you too, Frank. No, he raised his hands. I'm not trying to persuade you. I'm just curious. I thought about it myself after Martha died. The house became too big for one person. Then why did you stay? Memories, he replied simply. I feel her presence here, and in a new place, I would just be a lonely old man among other lonely old people. I nodded. Frank understood. Maybe that's why we'd been good neighbors all these years. Exactly, I said. A house isn't just walls, it's... I didn't finish my sentence because at that moment I heard a sound that made us both freeze. Sirens. Lots of sirens approaching our street. Frank and I looked at each other. Looks like your grandson was right about the danger, he said quietly. We rushed to the living room window, forgetting Jason's warning. Something incredible was happening on the street. Police cars with flashing lights, SWAT vans, even a helicopter circling above the houses. This entire armada was moving toward our street. My God, Frank gasped. What's going on? I couldn't answer. One thought kept running through my head. Jason knew. Somehow he knew this was going to happen. We stood at the window, watching as police cars blocked the street on both sides. Men in tactical gear jumped out of the vans and took up positions. It looked like a scene from an action movie, but it was happening right before our eyes. Get away from the window, I pulled Frank back, remembering Jason's warning. If the shooting starts, we retreated deeper into the room but continued to watch. After a few minutes, it became clear that the police's main focus was not on my house, but on the house across the street, the one where I had seen the mysterious new tenants. They're surrounding the Robinsons' house, Frank whispered. What's going on there? I shook my head, unable to answer. A voice amplified by a megaphone rang out from outside. This is the police! Everyone in the house, come out with your hands up. We held our breath, waiting for a response, but the house remained dark and silent. A minute later, the order was repeated in several languages. Still no response. Suddenly, the bright light from a police helicopter spotlight illuminated the street, turning night into day. I saw special forces taking up positions around the house, using police cars as cover. It looked like they were preparing to storm the building. My phone rang again. Jason. Grandpa, do you see what's happening? His voice sounded a little calmer, but still tense. Yes, Jason. What the hell is going on? There are police, special forces, helicopters. I know. Stay inside, away from the windows. This is a serious operation. Are you involved in this somehow? I asked bluntly. Did you know this was going to happen? Pause. Yes, he finally admitted. I couldn't tell you earlier. It's my job. Listen, I can't talk for long. Just stay safe. And don't go outside until it's over. Jason, but he had already hung up. I looked at Frank, who was watching me curiously. My grandson knew about this operation, I said. That's why he made me leave the house. He works for the police, Frank asked in surprise. No, for some cybersecurity company, but somehow he found out about this raid. We turned back to the window. The police operation was unfolding like something out of a textbook. The street was completely blocked off, and residents of neighboring houses were being evacuated. I saw the Jenkins, an elderly couple who lived 2 houses down from me, being escorted by an officer to the police cordon. Why aren't they evacuating us? Frank asked. Maybe they don't know we're here, I suggested. Or, I didn't finish my thought because at that moment, Frank's front door was kicked in. People in uniform with guns burst into the house. Police! On the floor! Hands behind your heads, they shouted. Frank and I froze in shock, then slowly dropped to our knees with our hands up. I was still clutching Helen's photo. Please don't shoot, Frank said in a trembling voice. We're just old people. One of the officers approached me. Are you Harold Thompson? Yes, I nodded, feeling my heart pounding in my chest. You need to come with us, sir. His tone became slightly less aggressive. We have some questions. Questions? About what? About your possible connection to the people in the house across the street. I was shocked. What connection? I don't even know them. The investigation will determine that, the officer helped me up. Come with us, sir. Frank tried to protest. He's just my neighbor. He came to me because his grandson. We'll sort it out, sir. Another officer interrupted him. Please stay where you are. I was led out of Frank's house. The street was as bright as day from the spotlights and flashing lights. Police cars, vans, people in uniform. It seemed like the entire city police force had gathered here. I was led to a black SUV where a man in a suit was already waiting. Clearly not an ordinary police officer. Mr. Thompson, he nodded at me. I'm Special Agent Clark, FBI. We need to talk about your Wi-Fi. My... what? I wasn't sure I had heard him correctly. Your wireless network, he explained. We have reason to believe it has been used for illegal activities. I stood in the middle of the street in my bathrobe and slippers, clutching a photo of my late wife, surrounded by police and FBI agents, trying to make sense of the situation. It seemed like some kind of surreal dream. I don't understand, I said honestly. My network. My grandson Jason set it up just a few days ago. At the mention of Jason's name, Agent Clark visibly tensed up. Jason Miller? Your grandson? Yes, I confirmed, feeling a growing sense of unease. He works. We know where he works, the agent interrupted me. Mr. Thompson, you'll have to come with us. We have a lot of questions. I glanced back at my house, quiet, dark, unremarkable. Then at the house across the street surrounded by SWAT teams. What connected these two places? And what did Jason have to do with any of this? They put me in a car. Through the window, I could see SWAT teams preparing to storm the house across the street. A helicopter circled above us, flooding everything around us with bright light. I sat in the police car, still clutching Helen's photo, trying to understand how my quiet life as a retiree had turned into a scene from a crime thriller. It all started with a midnight call from Jason. Grandpa, get out! Get out of the house now! Now, watching the police operation unfold, I began to realize that my grandson knew more than he was saying. Much more. And for some reason, that scared me more than all the police and FBI agents combined. A black SUV with tinted windows took me just a few hundred meters away, to a mobile command post set up at the intersection of our street and Oak Avenue. It was a large van with antennas and a satellite dish on the roof, similar to those shown in movies about special services. People in uniforms and suits were bustling around, no one paying attention to the old man in a bathrobe and slippers. Agent Clark led me inside. The van was filled with electronics, monitors, computers, radio stations. Behind one of the screens sat a young man in civilian clothes, typing rapidly on a keyboard. Have a seat, Mr. Thompson, Clark said, pointing to a folding chair against the wall. We'll keep you here for a short while the operation is underway. What operation? I asked, settling into the uncomfortable chair. What's going on? Clark exchanged glances with another agent standing at the door. We can't disclose the details of the current operation, But you're not under arrest. We just need to verify a few things. What things? I was still clutching Helen's photo like a talisman. I've lived 78 years without breaking the law. What has suddenly changed? Maybe nothing, Clark shrugged. Maybe you were just in the wrong place at the wrong time? But we need to check your connection to what's going on. What connection? To those people in the house across the street? I didn't even see them properly. Mr. Thompson, please remain calm. Clark raised his hand. We'll sort everything out. Wait here. He left, leaving me under the watchful eye of the silent agent at the door. The young man at the computer continued typing, paying no attention to me. I sat on a hard chair, feeling ridiculous in my night clothes, trying to figure out what was going on. Why was the FBI interested in my Wi-Fi? Who were the people who had moved into the house across the street? And most importantly, what did Jason have to do with all this? A few minutes later, the door opened and another agent looked into the van. They're ready. We're starting in 2 minutes. The young man at the computer nodded and put on his headphones. On one of the monitors, I saw a live feed from the street, apparently from a camera on one of the SWAT team members' helmets. The view was of the house across from mine. Are you going to storm the house? I asked the agent at the door. He didn't answer, but his gaze slid to the monitor, and that spoke louder than any words. I watched the screen, unable to look away. The team in tactical gear was approaching the house. One of them was carrying a battering ram to break down the door. Let's go, someone said into the operator's headphones. 3, 2, 1. On the screen, the special forces broke into the house. The image became jerky when the camera on the helmet transmitted the operator's movements. Shouts rang out. Police! Get on the floor! Hands behind your head! I watched, holding my breath. The special forces quickly checked the rooms on the first floor, then went up to the second. Everything happened very quickly and smoothly, as if they had rehearsed this assault many times. Suddenly, one of the operatives stopped in front of something I couldn't see on the screen. Command center, we have equipment here. A lot of equipment. What kind? Asked the voice in my earpiece. Computers, servers, antennas. Looks like a hacker center. I shuddered. Hackers? In the house across from mine? Could this be related to Jason's work? Any targets found? The voice asked again. Negative. The house is empty, but the equipment is warm. They were here recently. On the screen, I saw the camera showing a room filled with computer equipment. Monitors, system units, some devices with flashing lights. It all looked alien and strange in the old Robinson house, which I remembered as being filled with antique furniture and books. Check the basement and the attic, the voice ordered. They could be hiding. The image became jerky again as the operatives continued their search. I heard the van door open and turned around. Agent Clark entered. Mr. Thompson, he was surprisingly calm for a man leading a special operation. I need to ask you a few questions about your Wi-Fi network. I already told you that I don't know anything about it, I replied. My grandson set it up. When exactly? About 5 days ago, on Saturday. And have you noticed anything unusual since then? Internet outages? Strange devices near the house? I thought for a moment. No, nothing like that. Although, I haven't really been using the internet, just watching TV through it. Smart TV? Clark clarified. Yes, Jason brought it and set it up. Clark wrote something down in his notebook. Your grandson, Jason Miller, works for CyberShield, right? Yes, in the cybersecurity department. He said something about tracking hackers. At these words, Clark exchanged glances with the other agent again. Mr. Thompson, according to preliminary data, your Wi-Fi network was used as a relay point for cyber attacks. Simply put, someone connected to your network and used it for illegal activities. I was confused. But how? Jason said he set a password. Passwords can be hacked, especially if they are simple. Clark looked tired, as if he were explaining the obvious to a child. We have reason to believe that a group of hackers based in the house across the street used your network to cover up their operations. Hackers? In the Robinsons' house? I shook my head. But why would they need my network? They must have their own. That's exactly the point, Mr. Thompson, Clark explained patiently. They used your network as a proxy, as an intermediary to cover their tracks. When someone traced the source of the attack, the trail led to your house, not theirs, I began to understand. And I didn't like it one bit. Are you saying I look like an accomplice? That's what we're trying to figure out. Clark didn't sugarcoat it. Your grandson works in cybersecurity, sets up your Wi-Fi, and a few days later, your network is being used by hackers. You have to admit that raises questions. Jason has nothing to do with this. I felt anger boiling up inside me. He's a decent guy. Maybe, Clark shrugged, but he called you before the operation started and warned you. How did he know about the raid? The question caught me off guard. Indeed, how did Jason know? I, I don't know, I admitted honestly. He didn't say. We've tracked another device, the young man at the computer suddenly exclaimed. Someone has connected to their server remotely. Clark was instantly at his side. Where from? Trying to determine that, the operator typed quickly. It's a mobile connection, going through several proxies. Give me visual surveillance of the perimeter, Clark ordered into the radio. It may be one of the nearby objects. On the monitor, the image from the Special Forces camera was replaced by a view from the helicopter. The thermal imager showed the street, houses, people, all in different shades of red and blue. Check the neighboring houses, Clark commanded, especially Thompson's house. I watched as the helicopter camera on the screen turned toward my house. It looked empty. No heat signatures inside. Clear, the operator reported, but the signal is still active. They're somewhere nearby. Clark turned to me. Mr. Thompson, think carefully. Besides your grandson, did anyone else have access to your Wi-Fi network? Neighbors, friends, anyone? No, I shook my head. I don't have any friends who use the internet. And my neighbors, we don't really socialize. Except Frank, Clark pointed out. You were at his house when the operation began. Frank? I couldn't believe my ears. You suspect Frank? He's 72 years old, a former history teacher. Age and profession are no defense against the temptation of easy money, Mr. Thompson, Clark replied dryly. But no, we don't suspect your neighbor. We're just checking all possibilities. I leaned back in my chair, feeling exhausted. The whole situation seemed absurd. Hackers, the FBI, special forces, none of this fit in with my quiet life as a retiree. Can I go home, I asked, already knowing the answer. Not yet, Clark confirmed my fears. Your house is currently being checked for bugs or other devices. In addition, we need to wait for the results of the check of your Wi-Fi router. Can I at least call my daughter in, I asked. She'll be worried if she finds out about all this from the news. Clark thought for a second. Okay, but from one of our phones and in the presence of an agent. We need to check your cell phone. He nodded to one of the agents who handed me his phone. I dialed Sarah's number, praying she wouldn't freak out. It was almost 3 in the morning. She answered after the 5th ring, her voice sleepy and alarmed. Hello? Sarah, it's Dad. Dad, why are you calling from someone else's phone? What's going on? I took a deep breath. Don't worry, I'm fine. There's just a police operation on our street. I'm at a neighbor's house. What kind of operation? Her voice was panicked. Are you safe? Yes, I'm fine, I lied, looking at the agent standing next to me. I just didn't want you to hear about it on the news and worry. Everything's under control. Did you talk to Jason? She asked suddenly. He called me an hour ago asking about you. He sounded very strange. I tensed up. No, I haven't. What did he say? Nothing specific. He just asked if you had called me. Dad, what's going on? I don't know for sure myself, I replied honestly, but I promise I'll call you when everything is clear. Go to sleep. Don't worry. How can I sleep when my father calls in the middle of the night from someone else's phone and talks about a police operation? Sarah protested. I'm coming over right now. No, I almost shouted. Sarah, don't come. The street is cordoned off. They won't let you in. I'll call you in the morning, I promise. After much persuasion, she finally agreed to stay home, but made me promise to keep her informed. When I finished the call and returned the phone to the agent, Clark was already leaning over the monitor again, where the operator was showing him something on the screen. The signal's gone, the young man said. They've disconnected. Damn it, Clark slammed his fist on the table. Did you manage to download the data? Judging by the traffic, yes, but now there's no trace of it. Clark straightened up and looked at me. Mr. Thompson, you said your grandson called your daughter and asked about you? That's what Sarah said. I could feel the tension in the van rising. What's going on, Agent Clark? Is Jason in danger? I don't think so. Clark looked away, which was an answer in itself. But we really need to talk to him. At that moment, the door of the van opened and another agent entered, holding a black box in his hands. My Wi-Fi router. "This is from Thompson's house," he said, placing the device on the table. "The technicians have already begun their analysis." Clark nodded. "Good. What about the house across the street?" "Completely cleared out. The equipment has been seized, but the hackers themselves are gone. They left shortly before we arrived." "How did they find out?" Clark asked the question that seemed to be on everyone's mind in the room. The agent glanced in my direction but said nothing. He didn't need to. I already knew what they were thinking. "Jason, they suspect my grandson." "I want to go home," I said firmly, rising from my chair. "You haven't charged me with anything, and keeping an old man in his bathrobe in the middle of the night for no reason is an abuse of authority." Clark looked at me in surprise, as if he had forgotten I was there. "Mr. Thompson, we're not detaining you, but your house is now a crime scene, and you can't go back there until the investigation is complete." "Then I'll go to Frank's." I headed for the door. "Or do you consider his house a crime scene too?" The agents exchanged glances and Clark nodded. "All right, you can go back to your neighbors, but don't leave the area and be prepared to answer additional questions." I was accompanied by a silent agent, a young guy with a military bearing. We got out of the van into the night, which now seemed like daytime because of the floodlights and flashing lights. The street was blocked by police cars and people in uniforms and suits were bustling around. A group of technicians in white coveralls stood outside my house, apparently collecting evidence. The house across the street was brightly lit, the front door broken down. Through the windows, I could see people in gloves packing computer equipment into plastic containers. "Who are these hacker?" I asked my escort. "What were they doing?" "I can't discuss the details of the operation, sir," he replied mechanically. "Of course you can't," I sighed. "No one can discuss anything, but my life has been turned upside down." We approached Frank's house. A police officer stood on the porch, nodded to my escort, and let us through. Frank sat in the living room, pale and confused. When he saw me, he jumped up. "Harold, are you okay? They won't explain anything. They just ask questions about you and your grandson." "I'm fine." I sank into a chair, feeling my legs buckle from exhaustion and stress. "But the situation is complicated. It turns out that hackers used my Wi-Fi network for their operations." "Hackers?" Frank looked shocked. "Those people in the house across the street?" "Yes," I nodded. "And now the FBI suspects that Jason may be somehow connected to them because he was the one who set up my network." "That's absurd," Frank exclaimed indignantly. "Your grandson is a decent young man. Why would he get involved with criminals?" I shook my head. "I don't know, but he knew about the raid in advance. He called me and made me leave the house. How could he have known?" Frank thought for a moment. "Maybe from his colleagues? You said he works in cybersecurity. Maybe his company cooperates with law enforcement agencies." "Maybe, I wasn't sure. But then why didn't he explain everything to me normally? Why all the secrecy?" "Probably because protocol wouldn't allow it," Frank suggested. "These security services are always shrouded in secrecy." The agent accompanying me stood at the door, pretending not to listen to our conversation. But I saw his shoulders tense up when Jason's name was mentioned. "In any case, you're safe now." Frank tried to cheer me up. "Would you like some tea? Or maybe brandy? I have a bottle of good Hennessy. Brandy, please." I didn't drink often, but now was definitely the right moment. Frank went to the kitchen, and I stayed in the living room with the silent agent. Through the window, I could see the operation continuing on the street. Now 2 more vans had pulled up to the houses across the street, apparently to take away the confiscated equipment. Frank returned with 2 glasses of brandy. "Here, this will help calm your nerves." I took a glass and took a sip. The alcohol burned my throat, but spread a pleasant warmth in my stomach. "You know," Frank said, sitting down opposite me, "I always thought our street was so boring and predictable. Who would have thought that cyber criminals would settle down next door to us?" "It's crazy," I agreed. "I've lived a quiet life, and now in my old age, I'm in the middle of an FBI special operation." We sat in silence, sipping brandy and watching the action through the window. The helicopter was still circling above the street, illuminating the area with its spotlight. People in uniforms and suits were bustling between houses and cars. "How long do you think this will last?" Frank asked. "No idea," I finished my brandy. "But I won't be able to go home until they're done." You can stay with me as long as you need, Frank offered. The guest room is always ready. Thank you. I was touched by his kindness. But first I need to deal with Jason. I'm worried about him, Frank nodded understandingly. I'm sure everything will be cleared up. If he was just warning you about the danger, there's nothing illegal about that. I hope so. I wasn't so sure, but I didn't want to argue. We fell silent again. The clock on the wall showed it was almost 4 in the morning. I felt waves of fatigue washing over me, but I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep until the situation was clarified. Suddenly, my phone vibrated in my robe pocket. I jumped in surprise. I had forgotten I had it with me. The agent at the door instantly tensed up. Sir, I must ask you not to answer calls without permission. I took out my phone and looked at the screen. Jason. He's my grandson, I told the agent. I have to answer. The agent hesitated, but then raised his hand to his ear, apparently receiving instructions through his earpiece. Permission granted, he finally said, but on speakerphone. I pressed the answer button and turned on the speakerphone. Jason? Grandpa! My grandson's voice sounded tense. Are you okay? Where are you? I'm at Frank's, like you said, I replied, looking at the agent. Jason, the FBI, the police, SWAT are here. What's going on? I know, he said quickly. Listen, I can't explain everything over the phone, but you need to know I didn't do anything wrong. I was just trying to protect you. Protect you from what? I felt my anxiety growing. Jason, the FBI thinks you're connected to the hackers across the street. They say these people use my Wi-Fi network. Pause, then, yes, they did. But I'm not with them, I swear. I discovered this at work when I was tracking their activity. I saw that the signal was coming from your address and realized that they were redirecting traffic through your network. Why didn't you tell me about this right away? I was confused. Why didn't you call the police? I couldn't. His voice sounded desperate. I had no proof, only suspicions. And then I found out about the upcoming operation and realized that you could be under suspicion or get hurt in the raid. I had to warn you. How did you find out about the operation? I asked a question that I was sure would interest the agent listening to our conversation. It's hard to explain, Jason replied evasively. I work with security systems. I have access to certain information. Did you hack into the FBI database? I asked bluntly. No, he sounded shocked. Nothing like that. Just, there are protocols for information exchange between our company and law enforcement agencies. I accidentally saw the plans for the operation. The agent at the door whispered something into his microphone, clearly relaying the information. Jason, you need to come and explain everything, I said. The FBI is looking for you. If you're innocent, you have nothing to fear. It's not that simple, Grandpa, he sighed. I violated security protocol by warning you. I could get fired even if I'm not connected to the hackers. Better to lose your job than your freedom, I remarked. Where are you now? I can't say, he replied, but I'm safe. Listen, I have to go. Just know that I didn't do anything illegal. I just wanted to protect you. Jason, wait. But he had already hung up. I put down the phone and looked at the agent, who was already talking on his own communication device. Yes, sir, he called. No, he didn't say where he was. He claims he's not connected to the targets, but he knew about the operation from work sources. Frank put his hand on my shoulder. Don't worry, Harold. The kid just panicked. He'll turn himself in when he realizes it's the best option. I nodded, but inside I felt a growing sense of unease. What if Jason really was involved in something serious? What if his explanations were just an attempt to cover himself? The agent finished his call and turned to me. Mr. Thompson, Agent Clark wants you to return to the command post. He has some new questions about your grandson. I sighed heavily and stood up. Well, let's go. Although I've already told him everything I know, Frank also stood up. I'll go with you. That's not necessary, sir, the agent began, but Frank interrupted him. My 78-year-old friend, in his bathrobe and slippers, is being questioned by the FBI in the middle of the night. I'm going with him, period. The agent shrugged. As you wish. But stay out of the way and don't interfere with the interrogation. We left Frank's house. The street was still filled with police cars and people in uniform, but there was less commotion. It seemed that the main part of the operation was over. I noticed that my house was now also guarded by 2 police officers. That meant I wouldn't be able to return there anytime soon. We headed for the command post, but before we reached the middle of the street, a shout rang out. "Attention, everyone! A suspicious object has been found." People around us began to move. The police reached for their weapons, and the agents in suits began to give orders. Our escort grabbed my arm. "Sir, we need to take cover." "What's going on?" I didn't understand the reason for the sudden alarm. "One of the hackers may have returned," the agent replied briefly. "Come on, hurry." He pulled me toward the nearest police car with Frank following behind us. But before we could take a few steps, we were surrounded by people in tactical gear, pointing their weapons at us. "Get down on the ground! Hands behind your head!" they shouted. I froze in shock, not understanding what was happening. Frank next to me also froze. "What?" I began, but one of the officers interrupted me. "Get down on the ground now." Our escort, a young agent, looked as confused as we did. "Officer, this is Mr. Thompson. He's cooperating with the investigation. I'm escorting him to the command post." "We have new information," one of the Special Forces officers snapped. "Everyone on the ground, hands behind your heads." "That's an order." My knees wouldn't obey me, and I awkwardly sank to the asphalt. Frank followed my example. Even our escort agent was forced to obey. Lying on the cold asphalt, I tried to understand what was happening. Why did they suddenly decide that I was a threat? What new information did they have? "Harold Thompson," one of the officers addressed me, "you are under arrest on suspicion of complicity in cybercrimes and obstruction of justice." What? I couldn't believe my ears. "I didn't do anything." "We have evidence that your network was not used accidentally," the officer continued. "Your grandson, Jason Miller, passed information about the investigation to hackers, and you provided your home as an access point." "That's absurd." I tried to protest, but the officer was already reading me my rights. They lifted me off the ground and handcuffed me. 78 years old, in my bathrobe and slippers, I stood in the middle of the street, surrounded by police, handcuffed, accused of a crime I knew nothing about. Frank tried to protest. "You can't treat an elderly man like this. This is a mistake." But no one listened to him. They took me to one of the police cars. On the way, I glanced at my house. Quiet, dark, so familiar. Would I never return there again? And then, among the police officers, I noticed Agent Clark. He was watching my arrest with an expression I couldn't decipher. A mixture of satisfaction and doubt. "Agent Clark," I shouted, "this is a mistake." I didn't know anything. He came closer. "Mr. Thompson, we have evidence that your grandson passed information about the investigation to hackers. And he did it through your network. Jason wouldn't—" I started but stopped myself. What did I really know about Jason? About his work? About his life? "We found traces of remote access to our database," Clark continued, "and the traces lead to your router's IP address. Coincidence? I don't think so." I stood there, stunned, unable to believe what was happening. Jason, my beloved grandson, could be a criminal, and I, without knowing it, had been helping him? "I didn't know anything," I repeated, but without the same confidence. Clark looked at me intently. "We'll find out, Mr. Thompson. In the meantime, you're coming with us." I was led to a police car and seated in the back seat. Through the window, I could see Frank watching helplessly as agents and police continued to bustle around. The door slammed shut, cutting me off from the world. I sat in the police car, handcuffed, still clutching the photo of Helen, which by some miracle had not been taken from me. I looked at her smiling face and thought, "What would you say now, dear? What would you do?" But Helen was silent, and I was left alone, shaken and confused, not understanding how my quiet life had turned into this nightmare. The interrogation room at the police station was just like they show in the movies. Small, with gray walls, a large mirror that was probably one way, and a metal table bolted to the floor. The only difference was that they didn't handcuff me, apparently out of respect for my age. A small concession that did not comfort me at all. I had been sitting there for about 2 hours. Someone brought me coffee and a sandwich, but I didn't touch either. I had no appetite, only fatigue and confusion. They took Helen's photo after all, promising to return it after procedural matters. Now I keenly felt her absence, as if I had lost my last support. The door opened and Agent Clark entered, accompanied by a woman in a strict suit. They sat down opposite me. "Mr. Thompson," Clark began, "this is Special Agent Morgan from Cybersecurity. She will help us understand the technical aspects of the case. Agent Morgan, a thin woman in her 40s with short-cropped graying hair, nodded to me and opened her laptop. Before we begin, I said, summoning all my strength to keep my voice steady, I want to know what I'm being charged with and whether I can call my lawyer. Technically, you're not under arrest, Mr. Thompson, Clark replied. We have detained you to give testimony as an important witness. But if you insist on a lawyer, that is your right. I insist, I said, even though I had no idea which lawyer to call. The last time I had dealt with lawyers was when I drew up my will after Helen's death. All right, Clark nodded. We'll provide you with a public defender. But while he's on his way, you might want to clarify a few things. The sooner we get everything sorted out, the sooner you can go home. I hesitated. On the one hand, any lawyer would advise me to remain silent until he arrived. On the other hand, I had nothing to hide, and I wanted to clarify the situation as soon as possible. Okay, I agreed. What do you want to know? Tell me again about your Wi-Fi network, Clark asked. When was it installed? Who had access to it? And what was the password? I repeated everything I had already said on the street. How Jason came on Saturday, installed the router and the new TV. How we chose the network name and password. Physics rules, Agent Morgan said thoughtfully, typing something on her laptop. And the password? You said it was your late wife's date of birth? Yes, I nodded. Helen's 1945. That's a pretty simple password, she remarked. It would take an experienced hacker only a few minutes to crack it. I didn't choose it to protect against hackers, I replied irritably. I chose it because I could remember it. I understand, she nodded without judgment. Mr. Thompson, our technicians have analyzed your router. Over the past 5 days, a huge amount of data has passed through it, much more than one person could generate just by watching TV. What does that mean? It means that someone has been actively using your network, Clark interjected. And they've been using it for activities that require a lot of bandwidth. Uploading and downloading data, remote access to servers, possibly for hacking. And you think it was me? I couldn't contain my sarcasm. A 78-year-old retired physics teacher who barely knows how to use a TV remote? No, Mr. Thompson, Clark replied calmly. We don't think it was you personally. But your network was definitely used by someone who had access to it. My network was hacked by those hackers across the street, I said. Jason already explained that on the phone. Agent Morgan shook her head. Not quite. According to our analysis, most of the traffic was generated from your home, not redirected from outside. In other words, someone was physically present in your home and using your network. This statement confused me. That's impossible. No one was in my house except me. What about your grandson? Clark asked. Did he come to your house again after installing the equipment? No, I shook my head. Only on Saturday when he brought the TV and router. The agents exchanged glances and I realized they didn't believe me. Mr. Thompson, Morgan turned her laptop toward me. These are your router's log files. They show that every evening, from about 9 to 11, a device with a high level of activity connected to your network, and it happened inside your home. I stared at the screen, not understanding most of what was displayed there. Some numbers, codes, technical terms. I don't understand any of this, I admitted honestly. But no one in my house was sitting at the computer in the evenings. That's for sure. Maybe you just didn't know about it, Clark suggested. Perhaps someone had access to your home while you were away. I hardly ever leave the house, I objected, only to go to the store once a week and sometimes for short walks. And I have good hearing. I would have noticed a stranger. Morgan typed something on the keyboard again. There's another oddity. On the night of the operation, about an hour before the raid, an encrypted data packet was sent from your router to a server that we believe belongs to hackers. It looks like a warning. I didn't send anything, I said firmly. I don't even know how to do that. What about your grandson? Clark asked again. Could he have remotely connected to your network and sent this message? I thought about it. Technically, Jason could have done it. He knew about these things. But why? I don't know, I answered honestly. Maybe. But Jason isn't a hacker. He works in cybersecurity, protecting companies from hacking. Sometimes the best hackers are the ones who are supposed to protect against them, Morgan remarked. They have the knowledge, the access, and most importantly, the trust. You don't know my grandson? I began to get angry. He's a decent man. Mr. Thompson, Clark leaned forward. Your grandson knew about the raid in advance. He called you and warned you. How could he have known secret information about the upcoming FBI and police operation? He said he found out at work. I repeated what I had said earlier, that his company has some kind of information sharing protocol with law enforcement. We checked, Clark shook his head. CyberShield, the company your grandson works for, does indeed sometimes cooperate with law enforcement, but they did not have access to information about this particular operation. It was strictly classified information. I didn't know what to say. The situation was becoming increasingly confusing. Where is Jason now? I asked. Have you spoken to him? We're trying to locate him, Clark replied evasively. He's not answering his phone and hasn't been home since last night. That sounded alarming. Was Jason on the run? Why? If he was innocent, why was he hiding? There may be another explanation, Agent Morgan interjected. Mr. Thompson, you mentioned a new TV. Is it a smart TV connected to the internet? Yes, I nodded. Jason said you can watch movies and TV shows from the internet on it. Such devices can be hacked, she explained. Hackers could have gained access to your network through the TV. That would explain the high activity we recorded. It sounded plausible, but it didn't explain how Jason knew about the raid. I want to talk to my grandson, I said firmly. He'll explain everything. We want to talk to him too, Clark nodded. And the sooner, the better. For all of us. At that moment, the door opened and a young agent peeked into the room. Sir, he's here. Who? Clark asked, but the answer was no longer necessary because Jason entered the room. He looked exhausted. His eyes were red, his hair was tousled, and his clothes were wrinkled. But he stood up straight and confidently. Agent Clark, he nodded. I heard you were looking for me. Mr. Miller, Clark stood up. Thank you for coming. We have a lot of questions, Jason. I couldn't contain my relief. Are you okay? Yes, Grandpa. He smiled sadly at me. I'm sorry about all this. Clark pointed to a chair next to me. Please sit down, Mr. Miller. And please explain how you found out about our operation. Jason sat down and took a deep breath. I work as an analyst in the CyberShield Cyber Threat Department. We track suspicious activity on the network and try to prevent hacker attacks on our clients. On Monday, I noticed the strange traffic patterns coming from a group of IP addresses. One of them was my grandfather's address. Why didn't you report it to your superiors? Agent Morgan asked. I did, Jason nodded. We started an investigation and found out that my grandfather's address was being used as one of many proxies for a hacker group we had been tracking for several months. What group? Clark asked. They call themselves Phantom. They specialize in corporate espionage, data theft, and sometimes extortion. They're very professional and cautious. And how did you find out about the raid? Clark pressed. Jason looked down for a second, then looked decisively at the agent. On Tuesday, I was conducting additional traffic analysis and discovered that Phantom was reading encrypted police messages. They had hacked into the local branch's communication channel. I saw the plans for their arrest, scheduled for Wednesday night. And instead of reporting it, you warned your grandfather? Clark sounded disapproving. Yes, Jason didn't deny it. I violated protocol. But I knew that if the police raided the house across the street and the hackers were redirecting their traffic through my grandfather's network, he could come under suspicion, or even get hurt in the raid. I had to warn him. Do you realize you interfered with a federal operation? Clark looked at him sternly. Because of you, the criminals got away. I didn't warn them, Jason said firmly. I only warned my grandfather. If Phantom got away, it's only because they saw the same messages I did. I listened to all this with growing concern. Jason risked his career and his freedom to protect me? But why didn't you explain everything to me right away, I asked. Why didn't you just tell me what was going on? I couldn't do it over the phone, Jason shook his head. If the hackers were intercepting calls, they would have known I was on their trail. And I didn't have time to come in person. I found out about the raid just an hour before it started. Agent Morgan quickly typed something on her laptop, then looked at Clark. His version is confirmed by the logs. CyberShield was indeed tracking the Phantom Group, and Mr. Miller's report of suspicious activity was logged on Monday. Clark tapped his fingers thoughtfully on the table. Okay, let's say that's true. But that doesn't explain why such a large amount of data was passing through Mr. Thompson's router every night, or where that encrypted message came from before the raid. I can explain, Jason said, pulling a flash drive from his pocket. Here's the data from my investigation. Phantom used new technology. They hacked into smart devices in ordinary people's homes and used them as a botnet for their operations. Grandpa's TV was one of those devices. The new TV that you installed yourself? Clark remarked skeptically. Yes, Jason admitted. Now I realize it wasn't a coincidence. They knew I was a cybersecurity analyst and specifically targeted my grandfather's house. The TV was already compromised when I bought it. Are you saying the hackers were watching you? Morgan clarified. Possibly all of our department's employees. Jason nodded. They are very cautious and always one step ahead. As for the encrypted message, he paused. That was me. When I saw the raid plans, I tried to remotely turn off my grandfather's TV to interrupt the connection with the hackers. But the Phantom security system detected my interference and sent a warning. Agent Morgan took the flash drive and plugged it into her laptop. She studied the data for a few minutes, then nodded to Clark. Looks legit. Here's a complete analysis of Phantom's activities, including methods for hacking smart devices and a list of compromised addresses. Mr. Thompson's house is one of many. Clark didn't look entirely convinced, but his tone softened. Mr. Miller, do you understand that you violated security protocol and potentially disrupted a federal operation? I understand, Jason nodded. I'm prepared to take responsibility. But my grandfather has nothing to do with this. He is a victim, just like the other people whose devices were hacked. I looked at my grandson with pride and concern. He had risked everything for me, and now he could be in serious trouble. What will happen to Jason? I asked Clark. Will he be arrested? That's not for me to decide, the agent replied. But considering that he voluntarily came forward and provided valuable information about the criminal group, perhaps the case will be limited to administrative measures and dismissal. I've already been fired, Jason said calmly, this morning, for violating security protocol. The news hurt me. Jason loved his job and was proud of it, and now he had lost it because of me. I'm sorry, I said sincerely. You shouldn't have sacrificed your career for me. It's okay, Grandpa, he smiled weakly. I'll find another job. The main thing is that you're safe, Agent Morgan closed her laptop. Mr. Miller's information has been confirmed. The Phantom Group did indeed use a network of smart devices for their operations, and Mr. Thompson's house was just one of many access points. Clark nodded. In that case, Mr. Thompson, you are free to go. We apologize for the inconvenience. What about my grandson? I wasn't going to leave without Jason. Mr. Miller will have to stay for further questioning, Clark replied. But as far as I can tell, he won't be arrested. He may have to pay a fine for violating protocol. I breathed a sigh of relief. Jason also looked calmer. When can I go home? I asked. Right now, if you want, Clark replied. But our technicians are still working there, checking all the electronic devices. It might be more convenient for you to spend the night at your daughter's or a friend's house. I can take my grandfather to my place, Jason offered, if you don't mind. Clark thought for a second, then nodded. Okay, but be prepared for the fact that we may have additional questions. They returned our belongings, my wallet, phone, and most importantly, Helen's photo. I took the frame in my hands with relief. As we were leaving the room, Jason stopped and addressed the agents. You do realize that Phantom won't stop their activities, right? They'll just move to another location and find new devices to hack. We're aware of that, Mr. Miller, Clark replied dryly. And unlike you, we will act within the protocol. Jason didn't argue. We left the interrogation room and headed for the exit. It was early morning, and the sun was just beginning to rise above the horizon. I'm sorry, Grandpa, Jason said when we were outside. I got you into all this. You saved me, I objected. Without your call, I would have been in the middle of a police operation, and I might even have been hurt. But because of me, you spent the night at the police station, suspected of a crime. Better a night at the police station than a bullet from a nervous SWAT team member, I tried to joke, but Jason didn't smile. I should have checked the TV before installing it, he said. Check the network for vulnerabilities. I got too relaxed, thinking we were safe at home. Stop blaming yourself. I put my hand on his shoulder. You couldn't have known. We walked to his car, parked outside the station. I was still in my bathrobe and slippers, a ridiculous sight for appearing in public. But right now, that was the least of my concerns. Where to now? I asked as we got into the car. To my place, Jason replied. You can rest and change into some normal clothes. I brought some of your things. You were at my house? I asked in surprise. Yes, this morning, when the technicians were finishing up. They let me take some of your things, I nodded, feeling a wave of fatigue wash over me. The sleepless night, the stress, the interrogations, it all suddenly hit me. Jason, I said as he started the car, did you really lose your job because of me? He looked at me seriously. I lost my job because of my decision, and I don't regret it. You're my family, Grandpa. I couldn't just sit there and do nothing, knowing you were in danger. But your career, I'll find another job, he smiled weakly. There's always a need for good analysts in cybersecurity. Not all companies are as strict about protocols as CyberShield. We drove through the morning streets of the city. I looked at the waking world outside the window and thought about how strangely my life had turned. Just yesterday, I was a lonely old man arguing with his daughter about a nursing home. Today, I am a victim of hackers, a suspect of the FBI, a man whose grandson lost his job because of him. What will happen to my house now, I asked. Will I be able to go back there? Of course, Jason nodded, as soon as the technicians finish their inspection and remove all the bugs. We may have to replace the TV and router, but that's not a problem. What about your hackers? Will they be caught? Phantom? Jason shook his head. I doubt it. They're too careful and always one step ahead. But now the FBI knows their methods and knows about the hacked devices. That's something we pulled up to the apartment building where Jason lived. I had never been to his place before. He usually came to mine. The apartment is small, he warned, helping me out of the car. But it's clean. And the sofa is quite comfortable to sleep on. It'll do. I was so exhausted that I could have slept on the floor. As we rode up in the elevator, I looked at Helen's photo again. She was smiling as always. I wonder what she would say about all this. She would probably laugh at the absurdity of the situation and then praise Jason for his courage and devotion. You know, I said, as we entered his apartment, your grandmother would be proud of you. She always said that family is the most important thing. Jason paused for a second, then smiled, his first real smile that morning. Thanks, Grandpa. That means a lot to me. He showed me around the apartment. It was small but neat. My things were in a bag on the sofa. I was relieved to see my old pants, shirt, and sweater. Get some rest, Jason said. I'll make breakfast. I nodded and sat down on the sofa, still holding Helen's photo. The events of the past night seemed unreal, like a nightmare. Hackers, police, the FBI, accusations. None of it fit with my quiet life as a retiree. But one thing I knew for sure, my grandson had sacrificed a lot to protect me, and I would never forget that.